Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we step into one of the most secretive, disturbing, and psychologically complex cult tragedies of the modern era, a story that unfolded quietly across multiple countries, hidden behind symbols of spirituality, ancient myths, and promises of cosmic enlightenment, yet ended in a series of coordinated deaths that stunned investigators and shocked the world. This is the chilling story of the Order of the Solar Temple, a cult built on belief, secrecy, control, and a tragic path that few could have imagined. Our story begins in the late 1970s and early 1980s, during a time when interest in New Age spirituality, esoteric knowledge, and alternative belief systems was rapidly growing across Europe and North America. People were searching for meaning beyond traditional religion, drawn to ideas about hidden truths, ancient wisdom, and spiritual evolution, and it was within this environment that two men would come together to create a movement that appeared philosophical on the surface but would later reveal a far darker core. One of these men was Joseph D. Mambro, a charismatic and manipulative figure deeply involved in occult practices, secret societies, and mystical symbolism, while the other was Luke Jorrit, a former medical doctor with exceptional public speaking skills who presented himself as a spiritual guide and humanitarian thinker. Together, they formed the foundation of what would become the Order of the Solar Temple, blending elements of the Knights Templar mythology, astrology, apocalyptic beliefs, and the idea of spiritual ascension to a higher plane of existence. From the very beginning, the group was built on secrecy and hierarchy. Members were told they were part of an elite spiritual order chosen to protect ancient knowledge and prepare humanity for an approaching transformation, and access to higher levels of understanding was strictly controlled, creating a powerful sense of exclusivity and dependence. Many who joined were not reckless or uneducated, they were professionals, doctors, architects, business owners, and families who believed they were part of something noble and meaningful, a group that promised moral purity, cosmic purpose, and spiritual survival in a corrupt world. Behind closed doors, however, D. Mambro exercised tight control over members' lives, finances, and beliefs, demanding loyalty while presenting himself as a divinely chosen master whose authority could not be questioned. Members were encouraged to distance themselves emotionally from outsiders, including family and friends, reinforcing the idea that only the Order truly understood the coming changes in the universe. Over time, rituals became more elaborate, secret ceremonies were introduced, and fear-based teachings grew stronger. Members were told that the world was approaching collapse and that only those who followed the Solar Temple's path would transcend physical existence and move to a higher spiritual realm associated with the star Sirius. As pressure increased, doubts were reframed as weakness, questioning leadership was portrayed as betrayal, and obedience became synonymous with enlightenment. Financial exploitation also played a significant role. Members donated large sums of money, property, and assets, believing they were supporting a sacred mission, while leadership lived in secrecy and comfort, justifying their actions as necessary for spiritual preparation. By the early 1990s, internal tensions began to rise. Some members noticed contradictions in teachings, others became uncomfortable with increasing secrecy and psychological pressure, and a few attempted to leave, which leadership interpreted as dangerous threats rather than personal decisions. As external scrutiny from authorities and journalists increased, D. Mambro became more paranoid, reinforcing apocalyptic narratives and convincing inner circle members that betrayal was everywhere and that the group was under attack by hostile forces that did not want humanity to evolve. This paranoia set the stage for what leadership framed as a final spiritual journey, a transition they described not as an end, but as a passage to a higher level of existence. In 1994, the world was shocked when a series of coordinated deaths were discovered in Switzerland and Canada, connected directly to the Order of the Solar Temple. Investigators found members arranged in ritualistic settings, surrounded by symbolic objects tied to the group's beliefs, revealing that these were not isolated incidents but carefully planned events guided by leadership ideology. Further investigations uncovered letters and recordings suggesting that members believed they were leaving their physical bodies to continue their mission elsewhere, a belief system reinforced through years of psychological conditioning, isolation, and fear. The tragedy did not end there. Additional incidents followed in subsequent years in France and Switzerland, revealing that the ideology of the Solar Temple persisted even after its leaders were gone, highlighting the lasting power of belief systems once deeply embedded in the human psyche. Authorities and experts struggled to understand how such a well-educated, seemingly rational group could be guided to such an outcome, and psychologists later emphasized that the answer lay not in intelligence, but in emotional vulnerability, gradual indoctrination, and the slow erosion of independent thinking. Members were not forced overnight, they were led step by step, through trust, loyalty, fear, and a shared sense of destiny that replaced personal identity with group ideology. The Order of the Solar Temple became a textbook example of how modern cults operate, not through obvious extremism, but through sophisticated narratives, spiritual language, and psychological control masked as enlightenment. Families of victims were left with grief, confusion, and unanswered questions, while investigators uncovered layers of deception, manipulation, and symbolic theater designed to maintain obedience until the very end. To this day, the case remains one of the most disturbing cult tragedies because of its international scale, its secrecy, and the way it exploited humanity's deepest desires for meaning, belonging, and transcendence. Scholars now study the Solar Temple to better understand how charismatic leadership, isolation, secrecy, and apocalyptic thinking can combine to create environments where critical thinking collapses and belief becomes absolute. Ladies and gentlemen, the story of the Order of the Solar Temple is not simply about a cult, it is a cautionary reminder of how easily noble ideals can be twisted, how authority can hide behind spirituality, and how the search for meaning can be exploited by those who promise answers they alone control. It urges us to stay connected to the world around us, to question absolute truths, and to recognize that genuine growth never demands blind obedience or the surrender of one's identity. Thank you for joining me on this deep and unsettling journey into one of the world's most secretive cult tragedies. Until next time, stay aware, stay questioning, and stay safe.